Okay, so it is March 8th, 2022. Gold price has just hit its all-time record high, and I've come to the conclusion that we are totally fucked. And here's why. When people think about the price of gold or the price of silver shooting the moon and hitting record highs, they get carried away thinking about the value of their stack. But what they don't realize is what the implications are for the greater economy. Right now, there's a massive conflict happening worldwide, and it's not necessarily what you're thinking. Sure, you might have read the headlines and seen that the price of gold has shot up past $2,000 and honestly was getting pretty close to $2,100 today. But what's also happening concurrently is that the price of fuel has hit its all-time high. The price of fertilizer is absolutely through the roof. The price of food like wheat or all of the inputs that go into farming like seed, like fertilizer, all of these prices are absolutely skyrocketing. Now, in a couple of days, we're going to get the consumer price numbers coming out for February of 2022. But this number showing the year-over-year price inflation for consumers isn't actually reflective of what's happening right now. It's reflective of what happened a month ago. And that's if you actually believe the official numbers. As I am recording this video, the Biden administration also just announced that additional sanctions are going to be levied. This time, they are banning the import of Russian oil. And this has absolutely massive consequences, not just for fuel prices in the short term, but for the status of the United States dollar as the world's reserve currency moving forward. We are witnessing the expedition of the collapse of the US dollar. By placing all of these sanctions on Russia's economy, not just on the government level, but from all of these private corporations, payment providers, bankers, hell, even sites like OnlyFans and Pornhub. What we're seeing now is that credit cards, financial service providers, banks, private corporations that are seemingly totally unrelated to geopolitics, penalizing not just the governments and the oligarchs, the elite of Russia, but also the citizenry, and are attempting to basically shut down the economy from every angle. Even places like Coinbase, a cryptocurrency exchange, are now banning private citizens from being able to access their own cryptocurrency holdings on the exchange if they're in Russia. We're seeing domestic media companies, social media platforms censoring or outright banning particular news sources or dissenting opinions. And now there's even talks of using Poland essentially as a cutout for providing additional weaponry to Ukraine in the form of fighter jets. Folks, we might not be in a hot war with Russia at this moment, but the extent of these economic sanctions, this breakdown in global trade, we are basically in an economic war right now. I mean, this is a next generation version of warfare. Wars are won by logistics. And what we are witnessing is the United States and the global community leveraging all the tools available to limit money going into Russia, to limit exports from Russia. And while we might be putting the hurt on the Russian economy right now, and very clearly we are, I mean, the ruble has just absolutely plummeted in price. What we're failing to realize is that countries like Russia already have pre-existing relationships with other global competitor countries to the United States, countries like China, countries like India. And this effort to penalize Russia for their actions in Ukraine is going to have unintended consequences. Not only are we going to be seeing massive increases at the gas pump for fuel prices, but also everything that fuel touches, anything that's transported through commercial trucking, which is essentially everything, we are going to see price spikes in all manner of commodities. And that's just in the short term at home. At the same time, we are basically encouraging the development of economic relationships between Russia and other countries like China and India. And we're also kind of hamstringing ourselves and our allies in Europe in regards to fuel. Countries in the EU are heavily dependent on natural gas exports from Russia for heating. Thankfully, we're exiting the winter months at the moment, but this could have much longer term implications. And now that as a country, we've really hamstrung ourselves in terms of domestic oil production, we're going to just end up relying on other countries like Saudi Arabia Arabia or Venezuela. You know, we don't have many great options. And the world as it stands now is so heavily dependent on petrochemical energy that there's no way that we can just switch that up in the next few months. Even if the entire crisis was resolved tomorrow, we are still going to be experiencing all of the downstream consequences of these sanctions being placed. And what about countries like Turkey, for instance? Imagine, if you will, that you are the head of state for a country like Turkey. Not a great alliance with the United States, not necessarily an enemy, but kind of a more neutral status with the United States. And you look at what's happening in Russia right now, from economic sanctions that are being levied largely by the United States and allies. Do you think that that's going to be an encouragement for a country like Turkey? Or are you going to recognize that that's a huge risk and that your entire access to financial services could be cut off overnight at the whim of an American president? I can only imagine that countries in that scenario are going to start hedging their bets and start to seek out new trade relationships that aren't so heavily dependent on using the US dollar as the reserve currency. Now, if you compare the US dollar to other currencies around the world, we're honestly doing fairly well, regardless of the fact that the M2 money supply was so inflated over the past few years. But there's also just the reality that American savings accounts have grown by literally trillions of dollars within those past couple years. As the lockdowns start to open up throughout the country, we're going to start seeing a lot of that money flowing back into the economy, not just for people traveling and going on vacations, but for people needing to pull money from their savings in order to accommodate all of these massive price increases that a lot of people aren't accounting for and haven't built into their own personal budget. If you're living paycheck to paycheck and the price of fuel doubles in a few weeks, that's going to be a massive source of stress. And it's not going to be just limited to filling your gas tank. It's going to have downstream consequences on all that you consume, your groceries, shipping. When producers' prices increase, they offset those extra costs onto the consumer. Expect to see these price increases happening gradually and then more steeply moving forward, because these things do have a tendency to lag for a couple of months. It's a little more obvious with something like fuel. I don't want to be another doomer fomenting fear and trying to get people to buy up gold and silver as the price is skyrocketing. I mean, for me personally, I do expect to see the price pull back. I don't know how high it's going to get, but once it does pull back, that's when I'm going to be making some more purchases. But it's just important to remember that the price of gold going up is not always a good thing. You can see the price of a metal rise simply because it was undervalued before, and now people are recognizing its value in the current economic circumstances. Or you can see the price of gold rise simply because the currency with which you're purchasing it has been devalued. And that's the other way of looking at it. Maybe you're not buying gold for a high price in US dollars. Maybe you're selling your devaluing US dollars in order to acquire this real money in the form of gold. The moral of the story, brace for impact, folks, because this has only just begun. Silver forever, out.